"You're thinking too conventionally," Wellspring explained, as if reading his thoughts. "You see, Grimhaven isn't just a colony, it's an art project. We've been perfecting the science of transformation for 3 centuries now. Fear, pain, death, rebirth, we've learned to manipulate them all like a painter manipulates color." On the tactical display, Vexthal watched in horror as his own weapons turned against his fleet. Fusion warheads that should have been inert suddenly activated. But instead of detonating, they began to reshape the very ships that carried them. Hull metal flowed like liquid, restructuring itself into configurations that followed no known engineering principles. "Your technology is fascinating," Wellspring continued conversationally. "So rigid, so limited in imagination, but with a few small modifications, the first ship transformation completed. What had been a Kalani destroyer now resembled something that might have been grown. Rather than built, its weapons had become organs, its armor living tissue, its crew integrated into the ship's new nervous system." "No," Vexthal whispered, backing away from his command console as if it might bite him. "Oh yes," Wellspring laughed. "We've been studying your technology from the moment you entered our system. Every scan you performed, every weapon you fired, every tactic you employed, all data points in our grand experiment. Did you really think we'd just let you leave?" Across the fleet, ship after ship began its transformation. Vexthal officers screened as their workstations sprouted nerve endings and began interfacing directly with their nervous systems. The bridge itself was becoming something alive, something that breathed and pulsed with alien purpose. "Sir," Murdoch's voice was strangled with terror. "The escape pods. We have to." But the escape pods were already sealing themselves, their occupants becoming permanent components of Grimhaven's growing fleet. Through the agony of his own transformation, as living metal began to replace his bones and neural interfaces carved through his skull, Vexthal finally understood the truth. Grimhaven hadn't been invaded, it had been fed. Every fleet that found this world became raw material for the colony's true purpose, perfecting the art of war through the fusion of technology and biology. As his consciousness merged with his ship's new neural network, Vexthal's last coherent thought was a prayer to whatever gods might listen. But in Grimhaven's expanding amphitheater, the only gods that answered were the ones the humans had created themselves, and they were always hungry for new experiences. The Kalani 7th Fleet arrived 3 days later, responding to Vexthal's automated distress beacon. Admiral Rexithan commanded 200 ships and 250,000 warriors, enough firepower to crack continents. He'd received only fragments of the 3rd Fleet's final transmissions, but the implications were clear. Something on Grimhaven had gone catastrophically wrong. What he found in orbit defied every principle of military engineering. The 3rd Fleet still existed, but transformed beyond recognition. Ships that had once been geometric expressions of Kalani efficiency now resembled living creatures of impossible size. They moved through space with organic fluidity, their hull patterns shifting like breathing skin. Most disturbing of all, they transmitted on Kalani frequencies with voices that belonged to his former colleagues. "Welcome, Rexithan," came Vexthal's voice from the largest of the bioships. "We've been expecting you. The festival requires more participants. Vexthal, report your status immediately." Status, such a limited concept. "I am better than I was, Rexithan. We all are. The humans have shown us possibilities we never dreamed existed." Rexithan studied the tactical display with growing unease. The transformed 3rd Fleet held perfect formation around Grimhaven, but their weapon signatures were unlike anything in Kalani databases. Organic energy patterns, biological targeting systems, and hull configurations that seemed to phase in and out of reality. "Admiral," his intelligence officer whispered, "I'm detecting massive population growth on the planet's surface. The human settlement has expanded by approximately 3,000%. How is that possible?" "Our intelligence reports place their population at 8,000. "Sir, I think they've been recruiting." Rexithan's blood chilled as he realized the implications. Every Kalani warrior who'd landed on Grimhaven had been absorbed into the colony's population, their tactical knowledge and biological capabilities integrated into humanity's twisted vision of perfection. All ships, battle stations, he commanded, We're going to end this nightmare right now. The 7th Fleet opened fire with everything they had: plasma lances, kinetic impactors, fusion torpedoes, and exotic particle beams filled space with enough destructive energy to vaporize a small moon. For a moment, Rexithan allowed himself to hope that sheer overwhelming force would succeed, where tactical precision had failed. Then the 3rd Fleet's bioships began to dance. They moved through the barrage like living poetry, their transformed hulls flexing and flowing around incoming fire. When weapons struck them, the bioships didn't take damage, they absorbed the energy and grew stronger. Armor plating rippled and reformed, closing wounds that would have crippled conventional vessels. But worse than their defensive capabilities were their weapons. The bioships fired projectiles that looked suspiciously like oversized Kalani warriors, but moving at relativistic speeds. When these living missiles struck Rexithan's vessels, they didn't explode, they burrowed. Within minutes, infected ships began transmitting confused reports as their crews found themselves fighting intruders who seemed to know their every tactical doctrine. Admiral, the Conquest's Edge is reporting hostile boarding parties that appear to be modified versions of their own crew members, his communications officer reported, voice cracking with stress. Rexithan watched in horror as ship after ship in his fleet began to succumb, not to superior firepower, but to a kind of biological warfare that turned his own forces against themselves. The boarding parties weren't trying to capture his ships, they were trying to improve them. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Captain Yelmoran aboard the Stellar Dominance. Put it through. Captain Yelmoran's face appeared on screen, but his features had been enhanced. His compound eyes now contained depths that hurt to look at directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that shouldn't be possible with Kalani vocal cords. Rexithan, you have to stop fighting, Yelmoran pleaded. They're not trying to kill us, they're trying to make us better. The sensations, the possibilities. We never knew what we were missing. Yelmoran, resist whatever they've done to you. That's an order, orders. Yelmoran laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Such a primitive concept. Down here, we've learned to think in symphonies instead of commands. Every death is a note. Every transformation a movement in a greater composition. The transmission. Cut to show the Stellar Dominance's bridge, where Kalani and human figures worked together in perfect harmony. They moved with synchronized precision, their bodies flowing around control interfaces that had become partially organic. It was beautiful and absolutely terrifying. They're turning us into art. But when his surviving warriors turned to retreat, they found their path blocked by more humans, dozens of them, emerging from the very air like nightmares given substance. These were the faces of Kalani warriors, though how they'd obtained and attached them remained unclear. There's no need to leave so soon, one of them said through mandibles that couldn't possibly function on human anatomy. The festival is just beginning. High above, Vexthal watched his advance units' biosignals wink out one by one on the tactical display. Not the clean deaths of combat, but slow, methodical extinctions accompanied by data streams that made no biological sense. Sir Murdoch's voice was barely a whisper. The final transmission from squad leader Thexver. You need to see this. The screen flickered to life, showing Thexver's helmet cam. The squad leaders sat in what appeared to be an operating theater, carved from living bone, surrounded by humans in blood-stained surgical attire. They worked with calm professionalism, removing pieces of his exoskeleton with tools that seemed to shift and change between uses. The fascinating thing about Kalani anatomy, one of the surgeons explained to his colleagues, is how the nervous system integrates with the carapace. If we remove this section here, yes, see how he can still feel everything, but can't move. To stop us, Thexver's eyes found the camera, and in them Vexthal saw something he'd never witnessed in a Kalani warrior. Absolute, existential terror. Please, Thexver whispered. Please just kill me. One of the surgeons looked up, genuinely confused. Kill you? Oh no, we're just getting started. We have so much to learn from each other. The transmission ended. Vexthal stared at the black screen, his hands trembling. In 30 years of military service, he'd conquered worlds, broken species, watched civilizations crumble, But he'd never encountered anything like this, sir, Murdoch asked. Orders, below them. Grimhaven's population had tripled as more humans emerged from underground. They moved in impossible formations, their bodies shifting and changing as if flesh were merely a suggestion, rather than a biological requirement. Prepare the second wave, Vexthal said finally, but arm them with everything we have. The second assault began with orbital bombardment. Vexthal watched from the bridge as his fleet's main batteries unleashed enough firepower to level a mountain range. Plasma lances carved through Grimhaven's twisted architecture while kinetic impactors turned entire districts into smoking craters. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to believe that overwhelming force would solve what tactical precision had failed to accomplish. Then the smoke cleared, and the humans began to applaud. Magnificent, Mayor Wellspring's voice crackled over all frequencies. Absolutely magnificent. We haven't seen destruction on this scale since the Weeping of Worlds exhibition 3 years ago. Your artistry is truly inspiring. The orbital strikes had indeed destroyed buildings, but the humans had simply rearranged themselves around the devastation, incorporating the rubble into new, even more disturbing patterns. What had been twisted architecture now became a hellscape of melted metal and fused bone, with human figures dancing through the flames as if they were morning sunlight. Sir, reported Weapons Officer Kralm, the bombardment eliminated approximately 12% of the settlement. Human casualties appear to be 0. That's impossible. We just dropped 40 megatons of. They moved, sir, all of them, in perfect coordination, as if they knew exactly where each strike would land. Vexthal studied the tactical display with growing horror. The humans weren't just surviving his assault, they were enjoying it. Thermal scans showed massive crowds gathering around impact craters, their biological signatures spiking with what could only be described as euphoria. Launch the main ground assault, he commanded. All battalions. If we can't break them with firepower, we'll crush them with numbers. 20,000 Kalani warriors descended in the largest single assault in the Third Fleet's history. Vexthal had conquered star systems with smaller forces. Each warrior carried enough firepower to level a city block, supported by heavy armor and atmospheric fighters. But Grimhaven had been busy during the bombardment. The first indication something was wrong came when Lieutenant Colonel Zelmarin's battalion landed in what his sensors identified as open terrain, only to discover they'd touched down in the middle of an art installation. Massive sculptures made from what appeared to be living tissue surrounded his forces, their surfaces pulsing with unknown rhythms. Command, this is Battalion 7. We're encountering. I'm not sure what to call them. They appear to be architectural structures, but they're breathing. The sculptures began to move. What Zelmarin had mistaken for static art revealed itself as something far worse. Humans, who had undergone such extensive modification that they barely retained recognizable form. Some had been elongated into living pillars, their bones stretched and reinforced with foreign materials. Others had been condensed into perfect spheres of flesh and eyes, rolling across the battlefield with disturbing purpose. Open fire on anything that moves, Zelmarin commanded. His warriors responded with devastating firepower, plasma bolts and kinetic rounds tearing through the modified humans. But for every aberration they destroyed, 3 more emerged from concealed positions. Worse, the casualties didn't die, they adapted, incorporating their wounds into new configurations that seemed better suited for combat. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as each Kalani battalion encountered resistance that defied every law of biology and warfare. Captain Murthic's forces found themselves fighting humans who had replaced their bones with some kind of living metal, allowing them to reshape their bodies at will. Major Yelter's battalion engaged enemies who seemed to exist in multiple dimensions, simultaneously appearing solid just long enough to strike before phasing out of reality. But it was Colonel Vexthara's experience. Her elite shock troops had landed near what appeared to be Grimhaven's medical district, a series of pristine white buildings that promised easy conquest. Instead, they found themselves in the middle of the humans' primary research facility, where generations of colonists had pursued their passion for biological and psychological exploration. This is Vexthara to command. Her voice crackled over increasingly degraded calm channels. We've discovered what this colony really is. They're not farmers there, they're artists. And we're their latest medium. The medical facility contained horrors beyond colony comprehension. Operating theaters where surgery was performed not to heal, but to explore new configurations of living tissue. Laboratories where fear itself had been distilled into a tangible substance that ate through armor like acid. Archives documenting centuries of experiments in expanding the boundaries of sensation and experience. They're not trying to kill us, Vexthara reported, her voice hollow with realization. They're trying to make us into something new, something better. Her transmission ended with screaming that gradually transformed into something that might have been laughter from his command ship. Vexthal watched as his ground forces were systematically absorbed into Grimhaven's population. Not defeated, absorbed. The humans didn't just kill colony warriors. They studied them, learned from them, and incorporated their best features into new creations that were neither fully human nor fully alien. Sir, Murdoch whispered, we're receiving biological telemetry. From the surface, the humans, they're using our own people to create new soldiers. Better soldiers. On the tactical display, new signatures appeared, beings that moved with colony tactical precision, but possessed human creativity and adaptability. They fought with weapons that seemed to shift form mid-battle, deployed strategies that made no sense until they proved devastatingly effective. Vexthal realized with crystalline clarity that he hadn't invaded a human colony. He'd stumbled into humanity's laboratory for perfecting the art of war itself, and they were just getting started. Glass, the entire planet. Vexthal's words hung in the bridge's recycled air like a death sentence. His remaining officers stared at him with compound eyes wide with disbelief. Orbital bombardment was one thing, complete sterilization was something else entirely, sir. Murdoch ventured carefully. The Third Fleet's charter specifically prohibits extinction level. The charter doesn't account for this, Vexthal snapped, gesturing at the tactical display. Of his original 20,000 ground troops, fewer than 3,000 remained combat effective. The rest had either been killed or transformed into something that still transmitted colony biosignatures, but fought with inhuman cunning. Configure all fusion warheads for atmospheric ignition. I want this world turned into glass and vapor. As his crew reluctantly began preparations for planetary annihilation, Vexthal studied the surface feeds one final time. Grimhaven had grown. The human settlement now sprawled across half the continent, its impossible architecture spreading like a living cancer. At its heart, in what had once been the central plaza, stood a massive amphitheater constructed entirely from the bones of his fallen warriors. Inside that amphitheater, thousands of humans and their new colony hybrid creations worked together on what appeared to be some kind of performance. Magnify Sector 12, he ordered. The image resolved to show the most beautiful and terrible sight of his life. The hybrids moved with the tactical precision of colony military doctrine, but they created rather than destroyed, using weapons that shifted form like living tissue. They carved elaborate sculptures from materials that shouldn't exist. Their movements followed patterns that hurt to observe directly, as if reality itself was being rewritten through choreography. And the humans watched with the pure joy of parents seeing their children's first steps. Sir, fusion warheads are online, reported Weapons Officer Krom. All targeting solutions locked. On your command, we can render this world uninhabitable for the next 10,000 years. Vexthal's finger hovered over the authorization pad. One touch would end this nightmare, erase Grimhaven and its horrors from existence. But something made him pause a transmission from the surface that appeared on his personal frequency. Mayor Wellspring's face materialized on his private screen, though the being that looked back at him bore only passing resemblance to the human he'd first encountered. Wellspring's features had been refined, enhanced. His skull showed signs of surgical modification, and his eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Commander Vexthal, Wellspring said with genuine warmth, I hope you're enjoying our little demonstration. Your warriors have been absolutely magnificent specimens, so much potential. So many possibilities we'd never considered. You're all going to die, Vexthal said flatly, in 60 seconds. This world will be nothing but radioactive glass. Oh, I sincerely doubt that. Why? Wellspring's smile revealed teeth that had been replaced with something that gleamed like living metal. Because you're not the first to visit us, Commander. And because your fusion warheads aren't going to work. Before Vexthal could respond, his weapons officer's panicked voice cut across the bridge. Sir, the warheads, something's happening to the warheads. Every fusion device in the Third Fleet's arsenal was transmitting identical error codes. Not mechanical failures, but something far worse. The warheads themselves were being modified at a molecular level. Through the viewports, Vexthal could see strange energy patterns dancing between his ships, patterns that seemed to originate from the planet below. The screaming started at dawn. Commander Vexthal of the Kalani Third Fleet had heard death cries from 1,000 conquered worlds, but nothing like the sounds echoing from the human settlement below. His forearmed frame tensed as he studied the tactical display, mandibles clicking in confusion. The colonists weren't dying, they were celebrating. Sir, chittered his intelligence officer, Murdoch. The thermal scans show approximately 8,000 humans gathered in the central plaza. They appear to be laughing. Vexthal's compound eyes narrowed. 3 months of hyperspace travel had brought his armada to this backwater planet specifically because intelligence suggested it was a soft target, a remote agricultural colony called Grimhaven, established by human refugees seeking isolation. The orbital bombardment should have begun an hour ago, followed by ground assault and total subjugation. Instead, his fleet hung motionless above a world that seemed to want them there. Show me the surface feeds, he commanded. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that sent ice through his exoskeleton. The human settlement sprawled across a valley like a wound in the earth. But it was wrong fundamentally, architecturally wrong. Buildings twisted at impossible angles, their walls carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Massive bone structures jutted from the ground like the ribs of some titanic creature, bleached white by an alien sun dot, and the humans danced between them. By the void, whispered Navigation Officer Krelva. What manner of colony is this? Vexthal had studied human settlements across 17 systems. They built in straight lines, clean geometries, practical structures designed for efficiency and survival. This looked like something had crawled up from the planet's core and vomited architecture. Magnify Sector 7, he ordered. The image zoomed in on what appeared to be a massive amphitheater carved directly into living rock. Thousands of humans filled the seats, their faces painted with substances that reflected the morning light in unnatural ways. At the center of the arena, a group of performers moved through what could generously be called a theatrical production. If theaters in the Kalani Empire featured ritualistic dismemberment and reconstructive surgery as entertainment, Sir, Murdoch's voice cracked, I'm detecting elevated stress hormones, but not fear, excitement. Pure, undiluted excitement. Impossible. Humans feel fear. It's documented across every psychological profile in our databases. Not these humans, sir. Vexthal studied the readouts, his tactical mind trying to process the implications. His ground forces numbered 50,000 battle-hardened Kalani warriors, supported by heavy armor and atmospheric superiority. The humans below possessed no visible military installations, no defensive networks, no orbital platforms. By every metric that mattered, this should be a massacre. So why did his second stomach feel like it was trying to digest broken glass? Commander, called his communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. On screen, a human face materialized, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to contain too much knowledge. When it smiled, Vexthal noticed its teeth had been filed to points. Welcome, honored guests, the human said in perfect Kalani dialect. We've been expecting you. I am Carrion Wellspring, Mayor of Grimhaven, and on behalf of our entire community, we'd like to extend an invitation. Please, join us for the Festival of Open Doors. We promise you an experience you'll never forget. The transmission cut to black, leaving the bridge in absolute silence. Sir, Murdoch finally whispered, Orders? Vexthel stared at the tactical display, watching as more thermal signatures emerged from underground tunnels he hadn't noticed before. The human population was larger than initial scans suggested, much larger, and they were moving with purpose, arranging themselves in patterns that triggered something primal in his genetic memory. "Begin standard invasion protocol," he said finally, but maintain a reserve force in orbit. Something's not right here. As his fleet began its descent toward Grim Haven, Vexthel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't invading this world. They were being invited to dinner. And they were the main course. The first landing craft touched down in what appeared to be an empty field 3 kilometers from Grim Haven's main settlement. Squad leader Vexthel led his 40-warrior advance unit across terrain that crunched unnaturally beneath their boots. What he'd assumed was dead vegetation revealed itself as a carpet of bleached bones, small ones, intricate ones, arranged in deliberate patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Stay in formation," he commanded, though his voice carried less authority than usual. "Remember, these are primitives, no orbital defenses, no energy weapons. This should be." The ground exploded, but not with mines or conventional explosives. Instead, humans erupted from concealed positions, their bodies moving within human fluidity. Vexthver's thermal scanners hadn't detected them because they were cold somehow, impossibly cold. As if their body heat had been surgically removed. The first human to reach his formation wore what appeared to be the flayed skin of some massive predator. Still dripping, she carried no recognizable weapon, just a curved implement that looked suspiciously like a rib bone sharpened to a razor edge. When she struck, 3 of his warriors went down in the first second, not killed, but paralyzed, their nervous systems somehow disrupted by contact with the bone blade. "Open fire." Vexthel roared. Plasma bolts filled the air, but the humans moved like smoke given form. They didn't retreat or take cover, they flowed around the energy beams, their movements following no tactical doctrine he'd ever encountered. One human seemed to phase partially out of reality as plasma passed through his torso, then solidified just long enough to grab a Kalani warrior's head and twist it completely around. "These readings are impossible," screamed his tech specialist. Over the comm, their biological signatures keep fluctuating. It's like they're not entirely. The transmission cut off as something that had once been human, but now sported additional limbs grafted at impossible angles, dragged the specialist into a pit that definitely hadn't been there moments before. Vexthel fired his sidearm at the nearest human, a tall, pale figure whose face had been replaced with what looked like a surgical fusion of multiple faces. The plasma bolt struck center mass, burning through fabric and flesh, but the human just looked down at the smoking hole in his chest with genuine curiosity. "Oh, that's interesting," the thing said conversationally. "I've never been shot with ionized gas before. The sensation is quite educational." Then it reached into its own chest cavity, withdrew something wet and pulsing, and offered it to Vexthel like a gift. "Would you like to try?" Vexthver's warriors were dying not in glorious battle, but in ways that defied every understanding of combat his species had developed over millennia of warfare. One soldier's screams echoed across the bone field as a group of humans performed what appeared to be live dissection, their faces bright with scientific curiosity rather than malice. "Fall back," he ordered. "All units." "Oh yes," Wellspring laughed. "We've been studying your technology from the moment you entered our system. Every scan you performed, every weapon you fired, every tactic you employed, all data points in our grand experiment. Did you really think we'd just let you leave?" Across the fleet, ship after ship began its transformation. Vexthel's officers screamed as their workstations sprouted nerve endings and began interfacing directly with their nervous systems. The bridge itself was becoming something alive, something that breathed and pulsed with alien purpose. "Sir," Murdoch's voice was strangled with terror. "The escape pods. We have to." But the escape pods were already sealing themselves, their occupants becoming permanent components of Grim Haven's growing fleet. Through the agony of his own transformation, as living metal began to replace his bones and neural interfaces carved through his skull, Vexthel finally understood the truth. Grim Haven hadn't been invaded, it had been fed. Every fleet that found this world became raw material for the colony's true purpose, perfecting the art of war through the fusion of technology and biology. As his consciousness merged with his ship's new neural network, Vexthal's last coherent thought was a prayer to whatever gods might listen. But in Grimhaven's expanding amphitheater, the only gods that answered were the ones the humans had created themselves, and they were always hungry for new experiences. The Kalani 7th Fleet arrived 3 days later, responding to Vexthal's automated distress beacon. Admiral Rexithan commanded 200 ships and 250,000 warriors, enough firepower to crack continents. He'd received only fragments of the 3rd Fleet's final transmissions, but the implications were clear. Something on Grimhaven had gone catastrophically wrong. What he found in orbit defied every principle of military engineering. The 3rd Fleet still existed, but transformed beyond recognition. Ships that had once been geometric expressions of Kalani efficiency now resembled living creatures of impossible size. They moved through space with organic fluidity, their hull patterns shifting like breathing skin. Most disturbing of all, they transmitted on Kalani frequencies with voices that belonged to his former colleagues. "Welcome, Rexithan," came Vexthal's voice from the largest of the bioships. "We've been expecting you. The festival requires more participants. Vexthal, report your status immediately." Status, such a limited concept. "I am better than I was, Rexithan. We all are. The humans have shown us possibilities we never dreamed existed." Rexithan studied the tactical display with growing unease. The transformed 3rd Fleet held perfect formation around Grimhaven, but their weapons signatures were unlike anything in Kalani databases. Organic energy patterns, biological targeting systems, and hull configurations that seemed to phase in and out of reality. "Admiral," his intelligence officer whispered, undetecting. "Massive population growth on the planet's surface. The human settlement has expanded by approximately 3,000%. How is that possible?" "Our intelligence reports place their population at 8,000, sir." "I think they've been recruiting." Rexithan's blood chilled as he realized the implications. Every Kalani warrior who'd landed on Grimhaven had been absorbed into the colony's population. Their tactical knowledge and biological capabilities integrated into humanity's twisted vision of perfection. "All ships, battle stations," he commanded. "We're going to end this nightmare right now." The 7th Fleet opened fire with everything they had: plasma lances, kinetic impactors, fusion torpedoes, and exotic particle beams filled space with enough destructive energy to vaporize a small moon. For a moment, Rexithan allowed himself to hope that sheer overwhelming force would succeed where tactical precision had failed. Then the 3rd Fleet's bioships began to dance. They moved through the barrage like living poetry, their transformed hulls flexing and flowing around incoming fire. When weapons struck them, the bioships didn't take damage. They absorbed the energy and grew stronger. Armor plating rippled and reformed, closing wounds that would have crippled conventional vessels. But worse than their defensive capabilities were their weapons. The bioships fired projectiles that looked suspiciously like oversized Kalani warriors, but moving at relativistic speeds. When these living missiles struck Rexithan's vessels, they didn't explode, they burrowed. Within minutes, infected ships began transmitting confused reports as their crews found themselves fighting intruders who seemed to know their every tactical doctrine. "Admiral, the Conquest's Edge is reporting hostile boarding parties that appear to be modified versions of their own crew members," his communications officer reported, voice cracking with stress. Rexithan watched in horror as ship after ship in his fleet began to succumb, not to superior firepower, but to a kind of biological warfare that turned his own forces against themselves. The boarding parties weren't trying to capture his ships, they were trying to improve them. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Captain Yelmoran aboard the Stellar Dominance." "Put it through." Captain Yelmoran's face appeared on screen, but his features had been enhanced. His compound eyes now contained depths that hurt to look at directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that shouldn't be possible with Kalani vocal cords. "Rexithan, you have to stop fighting," Yelmoran pleaded. "They're not trying to kill us, they're trying to make us better. The sensations, the possibilities, We never knew what we were missing. Yelmoran, resist whatever they've done to you. That's an order, orders. Yelmoran laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Such a primitive concept. Down here, we've learned to think in symphonies instead of commands. Every death is a note. Every transformation a movement in a greater composition. The transmission. Cut to show the stellar dominance's bridge, where Kalani and human figures work together in perfect harmony. They moved with synchronized precision, their bodies flowing around control interfaces that had become partially organic. It was beautiful and absolutely terrifying. They're turning us into art. Yelmoran whispered before the feed died. They have no idea they're about to become the stars of our greatest show. Above Grimhaven, space itself began to resonate with anticipation, as if reality was holding its breath before the final movement of an cosmic opera written in blood and starfire. The combined Kalani Armada. 5 complete fleets, nearly 2 million warriors, and enough firepower to render entire star systems uninhabitable converged on Grimhaven. In the largest military operation in Kalani history, Fleet Admiral Zekthal commanded from his flagship, Final Judgment, a dreadnought the size of a small moon, carrying weapons that could crack planet cores. All ships, maintain maximum distance, he ordered. We've studied the bioship capabilities. Standard engagement doctrine is suicide against these abominations. The Armada formed a perfect sphere around Grimhaven's system, every vector of escape covered by overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't an invasion, it was an execution. Begin systematic bombardment. Zekthal commanded. I want that world reduced to its constituent atoms. The opening barrage dwarfed anything in recorded military history. Plasma lances the size of city blocks carved through space, followed by nova bombs that could sterilize continents. Quantum torpedoes designed to unravel matter at the subatomic level streaked toward Grimhaven, like falling stars of annihilation. For a moment, it seemed the combined armada might actually succeed. Where smaller fleets had failed, the bombardment struck Grimhaven's surface with enough force to shatter moons, turning vast sections of the transformed landscape into seas of molten glass. Then Grimhaven began to sing back. The planet itself had become an instrument. Every impact crater became a resonance chamber. Every destroyed biostructure a note in an impossible composition. The bombardment wasn't destroying Grimhaven, it was conducting it, turning destruction into music that propagated through space itself. Admiral, his science officer reported with growing panic. The quantum torpedoes aren't detonating properly. They're being absorbed, modified. I'm reading energy signatures that shouldn't be possible. Through his flagship's sensors, Zekthal watched in horror as his most devastating weapons were transformed mid-flight. Quantum torpedoes became living things that burrowed into his ship's hulls not to explode, but to improve. Nova bombs sprouted organic components that turned them into massive spores, spreading across his fleet like a plague of enhancement. All ships, cease bombardment, he ordered. But it was already too late. The spores had found their targets. Across the combined armada, Kalani vessels began their transformation into something that transcended the boundary between technology and biology. But this time, the process was different, faster, more refined, perfected through generations of practice. On previous fleets, "Sir," his communications officer called out, voice rising toward hysteria. "I'm receiving transmissions from the surface, multiple sources. They claim to be Admiral Rexithan, Commander Vexthal, and hundreds of others we thought were dead. Impossible. We confirmed their destructions. Sir, they're inviting us to join them." On the main screen, a familiar face appeared, Admiral Rexithan, but transformed beyond easy recognition. His features had been refined, enhanced, merged with technological and biological components that allowed him to interface directly with the bioships around him. "Zekthal, old friend," Rexithan said with genuine warmth, "you're just in time for the finale. We've learned so much since our arrival about consciousness, about the nature of existence itself. You have to experience this. You're dead, Rexithan. I saw your quantum cascade. Death, life, such binary thinking. We've moved beyond those limitations. Watch." The transformed 3rd and 7th Fleets rose from Grimhaven's atmosphere like living dreams. But these weren't the same bioships that had absorbed the earlier forces. These vessels had evolved, incorporating lessons learned from each successive battle. They moved through space like music given form, their hulls shifting between states of matter as they approached the combined armada. The battle that followed was less combat than it was education. The colony forces fought with desperate precision, employing every tactic their species had developed over millennia of warfare. But their opponents fought with something far more dangerous: creativity, bounded by infinite possibility. Every strategy the combined armada employed was immediately countered, then improved upon and turned back against them. Zekthal watched his carefully planned formations dissolve as bioships phased through conventional attacks, reformed behind his lines, and began the delicate work of transformation. His crews didn't die, they were recruited. Their consciousness expanded, and their bodies perfected for purposes beyond their original design. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "we're losing ships faster than we can track. The enemy isn't trying to destroy us, they're trying to convert us. Then we'll deny them that victory." Zekthal snarled, "All ships, prepare for simultaneous core breach. If we can't win, we'll ensure they can't use us." But even that final act of defiance was anticipated. "Oh, Zekthal," came Mayor Wellspring's voice from everywhere at once. "Did you really think we hadn't considered that option? We've been studying your species for months now, every tactic, every psychological pattern, every last resort protocol. The combined armada's self-destruct sequences activated perfectly and did absolutely nothing. The bioships had somehow infiltrated their target vessels so completely that they could override any system, including the ones designed to prevent exactly that kind of interference. You see," Wellspring continued as Zekthal felt his own flagship beginning its transformation, "destruction is just another form of art, and we've become quite accomplished artists." The final battle lasted 18 hours and resulted in the complete absorption of the colony. Combined armada, 2 million warriors became willing participants in Grimhaven's expanding vision. Their tactical knowledge and biological capabilities, adding new dimensions to humanity's greatest artwork. But the victory came with an unexpected revelation. As Zekthal's consciousness merged with his transformed flagship, he gained access to Grimhaven's collective memory and discovered the truth about the human colony. They weren't refugees seeking isolation, they were survivors of humanity's first contact with a species called the Devourers, entities that consumed entire civilizations for sustenance. Grimhaven had been humanity's answer to extinction. If they were going to be consumed, they would become something too terrible to digest. 3 centuries of deliberate self-modification had transformed them into predators that fed on the very concept of conquest itself. Every fleet that found Grimhaven made them stronger, smarter, more capable. They weren't building an army, they were perfecting the ultimate deterrent against galactic annihilation. "Now do you understand?" Wellspring asked as Zekthal's expanded consciousness touched the edges of humanity's true purpose. "We're not monsters, we're gardeners, tending a garden that spans the galaxy. Every species that tries to conquer us becomes part of something greater than themselves." Through the collective consciousness of Grimhaven's transformed fleets, Zekthal could perceive the truth spreading across the galaxy. Word of the combined armada's fate would reach every major power within months. The message would be clear. Some worlds were too dangerous to conquer, but more importantly, he could see the Devourers moving through distant star systems, consuming everything in their path as they had for millions of years. And he could see Grimhaven's response, a fleet of bioships carrying the perfected fusion of a dozen species' greatest warriors, moving to intercept humanity's ancient enemies. "The garden is ready," Wellspring announced to his expanded family. "Time to teach the galaxy what happens when predators meet their prey." As Grimhaven's impossible fleet departed for deep space, carrying the transformed consciousness of every being that had ever tried to conquer them, one final transmission echoed across all frequencies. "This is Mayor Carrion Wellspring of the Grimhaven Colony. To any who receive this message, know that we have learned fear from the bones of our enemies and written terror in the flesh of our friends. We are no longer merely human, and we are no longer hiding. The harvest season has begun. In the silence that followed, reality itself seemed to shiver with anticipation, as if the universe was finally ready to witness what happened when humanity stopped being the hunted and became something far worse than any hunter could imagine. The bones of conquered fleets would remember this moment for eternity.